Okay, a lot to digest. Thank you very much for that presentation. I want to start with some level setting for this conversation because we've been talking as a county about bus rapid transit for a very long time. It was, in fact, the county executive, when he was here at the council, that he proposed the network that we're now discussing, bus rapid transit, and it was nearly 20 years ago. 19 years ago, to be specific, that he first proposed this, and now we're seeing it being built out, being planned, working on the funding. And there are a lot of questions that all of us get and that I get as well as we work through the planning and making sure that the network works as originally designed. And so I appreciate the thorough walkthrough, Mr. Henson, for all of the 6 different networks that are being proposed. The first 2 that you talked about, Veers Mill and 355 Central, there were cost estimates attached to that in the PowerPoint presentation. $207 million that was needed for Veers Mill and $450 that's needed for 355, but there were no cost estimates for the remaining work on 29 New Hampshire and North Bethesda. Do you have that information?
Well, so part of it, it's on.
No, you're on.
Yes, sorry. So it depends a little bit on what year it's built, right? So in the baseline scenario for US 29, I believe we're at approximately $160 million, but that would increase as you inflate depending on what year it's constructed in. So the base price, if I'm remembering correctly, and I can get back to you with the precise number, but it's roughly $160 million. Now, if you were to see it in a budget proposal, it's probably going to be in a later year, and that number may be slightly more inflated. So you won't see $160 million. I hope that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Trying to forecast with cost of construction and inflation and everything else, that makes sense. And I should have prefaced this conversation by saying one of the reasons that we're having it is because there will be a joint T&E and GO committee hearing on Wednesday to talk about the financing for the 355 Central part. And so in advance of that, we wanted a deep dive that would help inform that discussion for more funding. There's a lot going on here. So I'm, again, trying to figure it out, and I'll yield to colleagues and then come back. But wanted to go to Route 29. I ask about the cost of all of this because it is undetermined how we're going to get all of that funding. I appreciate you noting that at least for Veers Mill, you said there was a 12-to-1 return on investment if we get those investments. Is that a fair way to understand it?
Right. If we don't get the federal grant, there's not a 12-to-1 return.
Correct. So we're still waiting on funding for Veers Mill. We are going to put a very big down payment on 355 Central on Wednesday, presuming the committee and council go in that direction. And then there's still funding that is needed for the other portions of 29, New Hampshire, and North Bethesda. It was also noted, trying to find my notes, that 29 was considered complete, but that was only for phase 1, not phase 2. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Phase 1's operational. It became operational fall of 2020.
And I distinctly remember it was this committee and the previous council that made the selection for Route 29 and Hastings Drive. I was walking my dogs on Hastings just this morning. I live in that area, and thankfully we got a light there a few years ago to make it safer. But the reason that the previous council moved in the direction of having the single lane was because that was the main focus. I'm not quite sure how many of these other routes were a priority at that time, and so we wanted to make sure that Route 29, the very first line, was done as well as it could be. Since then, the route map has been expanded considerably, and Route 29 is still not complete. And as noted in previous documents and has been shared with us this morning, there were other proposals that were less expensive, but are actually in the same mindset as some of these other proposals. Let me rephrase that. Amongst these other proposals, the other routes, are there any dedicated single track lines?
So on the other two planning routes, so New Hampshire Avenue, so we haven't selected an alternative yet, so it's a little bit premature to say that. When we looked at the center running elements of the alignment, those didn't perform well in the study. That's, obviously up to you all. I don't want to be presumptuous in saying that is an alternative or not, right? So we'll come back to you in presumably late winter, early spring to have that sort of conversation with you specifically. Those didn't perform very well in either New Hampshire nor North Bethesda. Okay. So what tended to perform better in those were either center running or side running lanes. So when you're repurposing lanes either in the center or in the sides in various portions of those corridors.
And for Route 29, both those alternatives were presented, and again, the previous council chose the center, not the side. But for two reasons, I want to say that I think there is something to be said about conformity amongst the whole system. That if there are side lanes across the entire system, then that is an understood way of operation. And then secondly, it's also noted that the side lane on 29 is 1/3 the cost for that phase 2, which brings me back to my original point of asking about overall funding to begin with. We know that funding is already tight. We know this CIP is going to be extremely tight simply from the demands that our school system is placing. Mm-hmm. Very rightfully so. Understand those needs. And so all of that is a very long way of saying I'm concerned about the funding for this entire network. And if we are in the early stages of some of these routes, or if we still have the availability and the time to rethink second phases for some of them, I think it is worth a conversation because my goal is to have an efficient system that is able to transport people throughout our county, but that ultimately requires it to be completed. And that means money. And if we don't have the money, then the best laid plans off Gangaglay. And so I don't mean to end on that note, but I want a system built. And waiting for the perfect is sometimes the enemy of the good. And as has been noted, all of these are very important. They're all good, but do we have the resources to actually make them happen? I have other thoughts. I will pause for a second.